Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you're comfortable, maybe lying down or curled up in your favorite spot. Take a deep breath, let the weight of the day slip away, and allow yourself to melt into the quiet of this moment. Tonight's story is one of magic, memory, and mystery. It's a tale of forgotten things and the quiet strength needed to remember them. As you listen, let the gentle rhythm of the words soothe you, carrying you far from the noise of the world and into a place of calm. Now, settle in, take another deep breath, and let the journey begin. The sound of rain came first, soft, hesitant, as though the sky were still deciding whether to weep or to sigh. Each droplet landed with a gentle patter against the high windows of the Ravenclaw Tower, drawing faint lines on the ancient glass panes. You were half asleep, swaddled in the hush of twilight, when it began. The world outside was wrapped in a thick mist, and the fire in the common room had dwindled into a soft bed of glowing embers. In this drowsy liminality between waking and dreaming, something stirred. Your bed was warm, the woolen blanket clinging gently to your chest, and the scent of parchment and lavender drifted through the air. Someone had left their reading notes nearby again. It should have been a night like any other, especially in the lull before final exams, when everyone was either panicking or pretending not to. But there was something strange tonight. A strange stillness. Not quiet, but of anticipation, like the castle itself was holding its breath. You sat up slowly, unsure why. The rain had intensified, casting a lullaby rhythm through the stone walls, but you sensed something else, something under the surface of sound. A subtle thread in the air. As you looked around the circular dormitory, you saw the beds of your roommates still, the pale curtains fluttering slightly with each draft. A low glow came from the spiral staircase down to the common room. You stood, barefoot on the cold stone, and crept down toward the source of the light. The fire, perhaps, had not gone out entirely. Or perhaps someone else had been unable to sleep. The common room was dim and hushed, the only illumination coming from a cluster of blue-tinged candles floating lazily near the ceiling. They flickered uncertainly, as though bothered by more than the draft. The tall arched windows revealed only the vague silhouette of the forbidden forest beyond the rain, and Hogwarts Castle itself felt unusually lucid, like a sentient thing watching quietly. That's when you saw Professor Flitwick. He was standing by the central table, the one carved with a massive eagle in flight and encircled by star charts. He was alone, small and still, his back to you. He looked older in the candlelight, more fragile, as though he were weighed down by years no one had noticed before. But there was strength there too. In his stillness. In his silence. He turned his head slightly when you stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "Oh, I thought one of you would wake." You didn't know what he meant, not yet. He beckoned with one hand and gestured toward the chair across from him. You sat without a word. Something in his demeanor made you quiet, reverent even. "I'm going to offer you something," he said after a moment, eyes watching the candlelight dance across the wooden table. "Something not taught anymore. Not since the last great forgettings. A branch of magic that does not shout or burn or dazzle. A magic that listens more than it speaks. A magic born of memory, of silence, and of restraint. You said nothing. There was nothing to say. Professor Flitwick looked at you now, and in his gaze was not just kindness, but something deeper, sadness, perhaps, or memory. This castle remembers things, you know, more than we ever will. Some memories lie in the stone, others in the wind that moves through the corridors. But some lie waiting in people. Students like you. Still, you waited. Do you know what it means to forget? He asked suddenly. Not to misplace, not to overlook, but to forget so deeply that it becomes absence. A silence so profound it rewrites what was ever there. You swallowed, unsure. But something about his words opened a door inside you. There is magic, he continued, that exists within that silence. We used to call it Siher Lupa. Forgotten magic. Not because it was weak, but because it was too subtle, too intimate. The ministry didn't like it. Too hard to regulate, they said. Too unteachable. But they were wrong. He leaned forward now, voice softer, like the rustle of pages in the library's oldest wing. This magic requires you to listen with more than your ears, to see with more than your eyes, and above all, to remember what others choose to forget. You felt it then, a flicker in your chest, a resonance, like the deep toll of a bell you hadn't known was ringing. There was no incantation given, no one movement to memorize, only a request. Meet me here again tomorrow night, he said, standing and extinguishing the candles with a wave of his hand. And bring your friends. Not all of them. Only the ones who hear what you hear. The ones who feel the castle breathing when others feel only cold. You nodded slowly. Not because you understood, but because some part of you already agreed. Back in your dormitory, you lay awake for a long time. The rain continued its gentle song, and the air smelled of moss and old secrets. Your fingers tingled, not from cold, but from expectation. When morning came, you were different, though no one could tell. You moved through the day with a quiet awareness, like a thread had been tied from your heart to the very stones beneath your feet. You caught on Mari watching you once across the courtyard, his expression unreadable. Callan chattered nervously at lunch but hesitated when your eyes met his. And Liz, as always, read alone in the shadows, yet you saw the way her hand stilled over a page, as if she, too, heard the bell. You told them that evening. Quietly. In the nook behind the spiral stairs, away from listening portraits. You didn't use Professor Flitwick's name. You simply said, there's something we're meant to remember. But we have to do it together. None of them asked why. That night, the four of you walked the halls under moonlight. The castle did not speak, but it felt. A pulse beneath your feet. A rhythm in your breath. You arrived at the common room again, where the candles already floated in waiting. Professor Flitwick greeted each of you not as a teacher, but as a fellow seeker. The lesson did not begin with instruction. It began with silence. And in that silence, you felt something bloom. Not a spell. Not yet. But the possibility of a spell. The first whisper behind the rain before sleep. The next night, the rain had stopped, but the air remained thick with the scent of petrichor, earthy, damp, like soil remembering water. Moonlight streamed in fragmented lines across the floors of the upper corridors, catching dust motes midair like ancient fireflies frozen in time. You moved silently beside Omari, Callan, and Liz, the four of you shadows slipping beneath the dreaming walls of Hogwarts. You did not speak. It felt wrong to break the stillness with words. Professor Flitwick had given no further instruction after that first night. Only a glance that told you more than 100 words ever could. A knowing, quiet glance that lingered longer on each of you, like he could already see what you would choose to do with what you'd learned. The castle tonight felt different. Not dangerous, but alert. Aware. Like something was watching from behind the tapestries and under the flagstones. As you turned a corner toward a lesser-used corridor on the 5th floor, the torches there flickered blue for a brief moment. Callan paused, nervous fingers tracing the cracked length of his one tucked in his sleeve. Liz noticed it too. Blue flame, she murmured. Older wards do that when something's been disturbed. Amari didn't respond, but his gaze had fixed on something ahead, a door. At first glance, it looked like any other forgotten arch in the endless architecture of Hogwarts. But the closer you drew, the more wrong it felt. The stones around the frame seemed newer than the others, as if they'd been replaced, and the door itself was weathered not by age, but by memory, its wood marred by soft impressions, as if fingers had long ago pressed against it again and again, trying to enter or escape. You reached for the handle, hesitating only for a second. It was cold, far colder than it should have been, like touching the skin of something recently exhumed. And yet, it welcomed your grip, unlocking without sound. The door opened. Inside was a room that felt untouched by time. Dust floated thick in the air, but the surfaces, shelves, a long central table, cracked stone flooring, seemed preserved in stillness rather than age. At first glance, it looked like a forgotten classroom. But there were no desks, only low wooden benches and a strange, shallow bowl of silver liquid in the middle of the room, quietly glowing. Books lined the walls, though most were blank. Their covers bore no titles. Their spines were cracked, and when you opened one, the pages fluttered without content, like they were waiting for something to be written into them. Callan moved hesitantly toward the bowl. He peered into it and gasped softly. "It's moving," he whispered. "But it's not water." You joined him and looked. The liquid shimmered like starlight soaked into mercury. It shifted not randomly, but deliberately, swirling into brief symbols, half-formed letters, then dissolving again. It wasn't language. It was thought, trying to remember how to be spoken. "This room is older than most of the tower," Liz said quietly, eyes scanning the ceiling, the cracks in the walls. "I've read about places like this. Rooms that appear when someone begins to remember them." Amari walked the edges of the room, fingers lightly trailing across the stone as though trying to trace the ghosts of whoever had been here before. He stopped in front of a tapestry so worn it looked like smoke, then turned back to face you all. "This wasn't meant to be found." "But it was meant to be kept," you replied without knowing why you said it. The words felt borrowed from another voice inside you. In the corner, half buried under a fold of fallen velvet curtain, Liz discovered the book. Unlike the others, this one bore a symbol on its cover, a single black spiral, coiled inward like a question with no answer. The leather was dry, flaking at the corners, and as she opened it, the air around you changed. It felt aware. The book opened itself further, pages fluttering with a slow elegance until they stopped at one covered in fine, fading ink. There, barely legible, was a single phrase. Only silence remembers the shape of what was lost. As you read those words, the liquid in the silver bowl pulsed once with light. You all felt it. A tug. Not physical, not magical in the usual sense, but emotional. It was like someone had called your name from far away, not with voice, but with memory. Callan stumbled back slightly, holding his wand like a charm of safety, even though its crack glinted under the moonlight. Did anyone else feel that? It's not just memory, Liz murmured. It's desire. Something wants to be remembered. You moved toward the book, your hand brushing against the text. At your touch, the letters bled slightly into the page, not smearing but softening, like ink weeping from the fibers of paper. The phrase repeated itself, but now with a second line revealed below it. And those who listen may find the unspoken path. The floor beneath the silver bowl gave a soft groan, stone shifting, breathing. Amari crouched, running a hand over the carvings now visible on the floor. It's a map, he said softly. A path through the school? But the markings weren't architectural. They didn't lead to places. They led to moments. And now was when it dawned on you, this wasn't a map in space. It was a map in memory. The bowl shimmered again, and this time, a brief image surfaced in the silver, a girl's face, half hidden by shadow. Young. Wide-eyed. She looked like she was trying to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes flickered, urgently, almost pleadingly, before the surface stilled again. Liz leaned forward, frowning. That wasn't one of us. She looked like Callan hesitated. Like she knows what this is. Or what it's supposed to be. None of you said it out loud, but the same name was in all your thoughts, Bruma. You'd heard it before. Not recently. Not loudly. Just in quiet mentions, a girl who kept too many notes, always asking odd questions, until one day, she wasn't mentioned at all. I think she found this place first, you whispered. But if she did, Amari added slowly, why didn't anyone remember? The silence that followed was thick and alive. You all stood there, uncertain, the silver bowl quietly humming with memories not your own. Then, without warning, one of the blank books on the shelf fluttered open on its own. Pages turned as though in a wind none of you felt, and then stopped. Words appeared, ink rising slowly like smoke. The first spell of Seher Lupa is not cast. It is listened to. You all stared. What does that even mean? Callan asked, more to the air than to anyone. Liz spoke, voice almost reverent. It means we're not here to control this magic. We're here to remember it. Amari closed the book with a careful hand. Then we start with her. With Bruma. If she remembered first, maybe she left a trail. You nodded, heart now filled with a strange quiet conviction. Something was unfolding around you, softly, like the petals of a flower blooming under moonlight. This wasn't the kind of magic you'd read about. Not the kind you learned in dueling clubs or spell books. This magic waited. And now, it was beginning to wake. The day passed like a dream half remembered. Your body moved through lessons and corridors, but your thoughts wandered, looping again and again around that shimmer of silver, the girl's face in the bowl, and the phrase written in fading ink, only silence remembers the shape of what was lost. It stayed with you like a whispered secret nestled between your ribs. You couldn't shake the feeling that the castle was trying to speak, through dust, through the weight of still air, through the gentle scuff of your shoes on cold stone. At breakfast, Callan barely touched his porridge. His eyes kept drifting to the far windows, watching clouds spool across the sky in shades of ivory and ash. Liz, unusually quiet, stared into the folds of a tattered book she wasn't reading. Amari wasn't even at the table. He had slipped away before sunrise, leaving no trace but the soft indent of his weight in the dormitory mattress. You didn't need to ask where he'd gone. By evening, when the castle's long shadows stretched across its ancient bones and the glow of candles softened the edges of everything, you found each other again. No one had to say it. You were going back. The door to the forgotten room opened with less resistance this time. It was like the room had started recognizing you, as if it, too, remembered. Inside, the bowl was still. The book with the black spiral lay closed on the central table, and the blank volumes along the shelves sat like dormant minds, waiting to be woken. Amari was already there. He stood by the far wall, not turning as you entered. His fingers brushed slowly over a low-set stone that jutted slightly from the base of the wall, as if it had been pressed, over and over again, by small, uncertain hands. She was here, he said without looking. You stepped closer, and now you could see it too. A faint mark on the stone, barely visible in the shifting firelight, a spiral, identical to the one on the book. But this one had been scratched in with something sharp, not carved. Bruma, Liz murmured. She left it behind. Callan hovered near the silver bowl, voice uneasy. Why do I feel like she didn't just find this place, she lived in it? You didn't answer. Not with words. You stepped to the spiral on the wall and pressed your palm to the stone. The cold surged into your skin, but behind it was something else, a pulse, a memory caught in the grain of the rock. You closed your eyes. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the silence changed. It became thicker, like fabric soaked in rain, muffling the edges of the world. You heard a soft intake of breath, not yours, and then a voice. If someone finds this, I hope you're kind. It was faint, like it had traveled a long way. A girl's voice. Careful. Fractured by hesitation. You opened your eyes, breath caught in your throat. I heard her, you whispered. She left something in the stone. Amari didn't speak, but his eyes had narrowed, deep in thought. Callan was pacing now, fingers fluttering nervously. This is getting. I mean, if she's not here anymore, if no one remembers her, what happened to her? She vanished, Liz said softly. That's what I found in the library. One line in a list of discontinued students. Brumaleth. Removed from the registry. Cause, inconclusive. That's not just vanishing, you murmured. That's being erased. The bowl shimmered behind you again. This time, none of you moved toward it immediately. There was something reverent in the air, some instinct that told you to stay still and listen. The silver surface quivered like disturbed water, then slowly formed into a swirl of motion, showing a place, a stairwell you recognized but couldn't quite name. The camera of the memory shifted strangely, not like a pensive. It wasn't a scene viewed from above. It was from inside. You were seeing it the way someone remembered it, not the way it happened. A girl sat in shadow on the stairs, knees drawn to her chest, a quill dancing in her fingers. Not writing, just spinning. She was whispering to herself, words too faint to hear, but her mouth formed one name over and over. Callan. Callan stepped back like he'd been struck. What? That's not. How would she? Liz moved to the bowl, her eyes sharp. This magic doesn't just hold memory. It holds connection. Emotional memory. She must have known you. Callan looked stunned. I don't remember her. I swear. I've never. He stopped, biting his lip. Except once. I had a dream, first year. I was lost. She found me. Said to follow the blue light. That wasn't a dream, Amari said quietly. No one spoke after that. Eventually, you moved toward the bowl. It had stilled, but a new image lingered in its depths. Not a person, not a place, but a symbol, a jagged circle surrounded by jagged lines. A sun? A cracked mirror? Liz turned slowly to face the rest of you. I think there's more. I think Bruma was on the trail of this magic. But she wasn't just studying it. She was protecting it. Callan swallowed. From what? A long pause. Amari spoke next, voice low and clipped. There's something in this castle that doesn't want it remembered. He turned to the back wall, the one with the spiral. With a flick of his wand, soft, slow, gentle, he whispered, Revelar Memoria. The stones groaned faintly, then parted, not like doors, but like lungs drawing a breath. A narrow passage revealed itself behind the wall, the air within heavy with the scent of old paper and something else. Smoke. But not from fire. This smoke felt cold. Metallic. The residue of something unfinished. You all stared into the dark, where the corridor curved out of sight. You took a step forward. Then another. Behind you, the bowl pulsed once more, and from it rose the quiet echo of a girl's voice, too soft to decipher completely, but carrying one clear word before it faded again into silver. Run. And suddenly, the warmth of the room dimmed. The torches flickered. The castle sighed, deep, long, and low. But you didn't run. Not yet. You stepped into the passageway together. Because silence had remembered. And now, it was your turn. The passage behind the spiral wall was narrow and dry, the stone underfoot worn smooth by what must have been centuries of forgotten steps. No torch hung on the wall, yet the walls themselves gave off a faint, unnatural glow, a bluish sheen, like moonlight trapped beneath the skin of the earth. As you stepped deeper, the air grew colder, but not in the way of wind or chill. This cold was still, unmoving, like it had been waiting for someone to feel it again. Your breath misted as you exhaled, and behind you, Callan shivered audibly. Feels like we're walking through someone's memory, he whispered, hugging his robe tighter. His wand flickered with dim, sputtering light, the fracture in its wood catching faint sparks like embers caught in a dying fire. Amari walked ahead, silent, composed. There was a tension in his posture, not fear, exactly, but readiness, like he was listening for something you couldn't yet hear. Liz followed behind, eyes tracing every seam in the wall, cataloging details even as the darkness seemed to close in. The passageway curved downward in a slow spiral, deeper than you thought the castle could go. You began to wonder how many layers Hogwarts held beneath its surface. How many stories had been buried beneath its newest stones. And why no one had ever found this place, unless, of course, they had and were now forgotten. After what felt like half an hour, the tunnel opened into a chamber. And there, beneath the very bones of the library, you found the hollow. The ceiling stretched higher than it should have been possible underground, supported by pale stone columns carved in spiraling patterns that mirrored the symbol on Bruma's book. Runes danced faintly along their surfaces, glowing and fading in rhythm like breathing. A few scattered candles hovered in midair, unchained, flickering silently, though their wax never dripped and their flames bore no heat. The walls were lined with mirrors. Dozens of them. Each one slightly warped, not broken, but subtly wrong, as though they reflected not the world in front of them, but something just adjacent. A different moment. A thought left behind. And in the center of the room stood a desk. Not a teacher's desk, not a student's, but something in between. Old. Carved with symbols and wrapped in dust, but with papers still resting on top, as if whoever had last used it had meant to return. You moved forward slowly, every step accompanied by the soft shuffle of robes and the echo of your heart in your ears. You reached for the papers. The ink had faded to sepia, the handwriting rushed but neat. The top sheet bore a name you hadn't seen before. The Bellatrix Theorem. And below it, a scrawled note in a different hand. Don't read aloud. It listens. You blinked and looked to the others. Liz was already reaching for one of the side scrolls. Amari stood before one of the mirrors, watching it intently. And Callan had stopped. He stood a few feet from the desk, staring upward, eyes wide with something close to horror. You followed his gaze. On the far wall, written in long, looping script that glowed softly against the stone, were words that seemed to burn as you read them. I saw you. In the hollow. You tried to run. You came back anyway. And below it, a signature. Shaky. Small. Bruma. She was here, you whispered. She left this. For us. Or maybe, for herself. Amari turned from the mirror. This place isn't a secret chamber. It's a memory vault. Liz nodded. Built by someone who knew their memories could be taken. She was anchoring herself, leaving fragments. So she wouldn't be erased completely. But who would try to erase her? Callan asked, voice barely above a breath. Why? What did she know? It was Liz who answered. See her lupa. The forgotten branch of magic. The one Flitwick had whispered about. The one that had no name in any current textbook, no practice taught in any class. This kind of magic doesn't create or destroy, she continued. It remembers. It's built on the act of witnessing, feeling, holding on to moments that want to fade. It's the opposite of obliviate. Amari's gaze darkened, which means someone out there doesn't just want power. They want forgetting. They want silence. And just as he spoke the word, one of the mirrors on the wall flickered. It showed not your reflection, but Bruma's. She stood in what looked like this very room, much younger, her robes slightly too large, her hair pulled into a nervous braid. She was speaking, but there was no sound. Her mouth moved, forming syllables, then whole sentences. You stepped closer, and though you could not hear her, the mirror showed her handwriting appearing on the glass, one word at a time. He watches from below. Callan flinched. Who? The mirror pulsed. More words. He has no name. Only a voice. The archivist. Liz stepped closer, breath caught in her throat. I've read about that. Old legend. A keeper of lost things. Not a man, not a ghost, something older. He collects what people forget. Sometimes he makes them forget. And Bruma found him, you murmured. No, Amari said. He found her. Another mirror flickered now. Then another. Across the room, one by one, they all began to shimmer and reflect scenes of Bruma, running furiously, crying silently, crouched in this very hollow, hiding from something that passed just beyond the reach of the torchlight. Then, one final image, Bruma standing before the desk, placing a feather, white and old, like it had fallen from a memory of a bird, on the parchment. Her eyes locked on you through the mirror. And then she vanished. The room dimmed. A silence bloomed, not empty, but full. A silence with weight. Like a breath held far too long. Then, from the dark behind one of the mirrors, a whisper, not echoing, not loud, but present. You are not the first. But you may be the last. The candles flickered, and for a single, sharp moment, you felt eyes on you. Not warm, not hateful, simply observing. Then the moment passed. You turned to the desk. The parchment now bore a single message, new and written in the same strange, fading ink as before. When you speak of what is forgotten, it begins to remember itself. A warning, or a promise. You gathered the papers and the feather Bruma had left. Somehow, you knew they were meant to be taken. You looked to your friends. Callan's hands trembled, but he nodded. Liz had tears on her cheeks but didn't seem to notice. Amari's eyes were distant, sharp, already thinking, already planning. You would not forget Bruma. You would not let this be silenced. And as you turned to leave the hollow, the path behind you remained open, but only barely. The air had shifted. Something had changed. You were no longer visitors. Now, you were part of it. The hollow had remembered you. The days that followed your discovery of the hollow passed with a strange, quiet tension. The castle seemed to breathe differently, its long corridors holding their air a little too long, the staircases shifting paths just slightly off their usual rhythm. You began to notice the silence between words, the pause between candle flickers. Hogwarts was no longer just a school. It was listening. Professor Flitwick's classes continued, but you could see the strain behind his smile. There were more lessons about obscure charms, lost histories, subtle spells meant to reveal what had been hidden, not taught in the standard curriculum, not even written in the official textbooks. He made you swear secrecy before each lesson. Not in jest. Not with a wink. With a gravity that settled deep in your bones. Today, the class met in a circular room you'd never seen before, tucked behind a tapestry of a sleeping giant cradling stars in his beard. The room was low-ceilinged, filled with smoky blue light, and entirely round, no corners, no windows, just velvet shadow pressing in at the edges. In the center stood a platform made of silver runes, humming softly. Flitwick gestured for silence. "We call this space the Echo Room," he said, his voice no louder than a murmur. "It reflects only truth, but not always yours." You exchanged a glance with Callan, whose hands twitched nervously in his lap. Liz sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the platform. Amari stood in the shadows, apart from the rest, watching. "This," Flitwick continued, "is where we test the resonance of Bellatrix's memory. Magic that remembers what others forget. But it comes at a cost. If what you carry is not truly yours, it will not speak. If it is, it may speak too loudly." He turned to you. "Would you care to begin?" You swallowed, then nodded. You stepped onto the platform, still carrying the parchment and feather Bruma had left behind. The moment your foot touched the runes, they lit, not with fire, but with something gentler, like light filtered through thick fog. "Hold the feather in your palm," Flitwick said gently, "and say her name." You didn't hesitate. Bruma left. The silence that followed was deep and living. Then, a soft hum. The platform responded, vibrating just beneath your feet, as if something ancient and slow had been stirred awake. A ring of light formed around you, shimmering, and within it rose a voice, not yours, not Flitwick's. "I remember the river that ran beneath the castle. I remember the books no one checked out. I remember his voice. The way it filled the room and left no space for mine. The voice was Bruma's. Young. Strained. The light pulsed. He took my silence and made it his. Then the runes dimmed. The spell ended. You staggered slightly as you stepped off the platform, your breath short. Liz was already scribbling notes furiously. Callan had gone pale. Amari's jaw was tight. Flitwick approached, eyes serious. She left an imprint. Not just in the hollow. In the very fabric of the school. You were pulling it forward. She was trying to warn someone, you said softly. Someone who could listen. She was trying to remember, Flitwick corrected. Before he could take that from her, too. He didn't say who. But that night, after lights out, you and your friends returned to the hollow. The castle seemed to allow it now. The walls no longer fought you. The staircase that had once led to a broom closet now twisted open with a soft click, revealing the downward spiral into shadow once more. The hollow was colder than before. The mirrors had stilled, no longer showing Bruma. But there was a sound now, a faint, breath-like exhale. Long rhythmic. Like something enormous sleeping just beyond the stone. Callan stood at the edge of the chamber, eyes darting. "Tell me you hear that." Liz nodded slowly. "It's beneath us." You stepped forward. The central desk was undisturbed, but the papers you'd taken had left a shadow behind, a faint mark as if memory itself noticed their absence. The feather had turned a darker hue since you last held it, no longer white, but silvery gray, like the color of fog at dawn. "I think we're close to something," you said. "But we don't know it yet." Amari knelt by the mirror that had spoken before. He pressed his palm against the glass. It's like she's trapped between remembering and vanishing. Like a ghost? Callan asked. Amari shook his head. Not a ghost. She isn't dead. She's just disconnected. Liz turned slowly toward the far wall. Disconnected by him. And then, for the first time, you all saw it. A mark had appeared on the back wall, an outline of a handprint, far too large to be human, pressed into the stone as if it had burned its shape there long ago. And from that mark, the breath sound emanated. Not from air, but from memory. Callan's voice was barely a whisper. That's where he touched the world. The archivist. The stories called him a myth. A shadow that fed on stories not told, names not spoken. The keeper of erased things. But now you knew. He was real. And he had touched Bruma's life, perhaps even taken it from her, piece by piece, until all that remained were echoes and fragments. Amari stood slowly. We need to confront him. But he's not a person. He's a space. A force. We need a way into memory. Liz drew a tattered book she'd been carrying since the first visit. There's a charm. Half finished. Bruma was working on it. A way to anchor yourself to a memory from the inside. Like climbing into it rather than pulling it out. Callan took a step back. Isn't that dangerous? It's inherently dangerous, Amari said. But so is forgetting. The group fell silent. You looked at your friends, each changed in subtle ways since this began. Callan's eyes were sharper, despite the fear. Liz was more open, the steel of her mind tempered by compassion. Amari, ever watchful, was now quietly burning with purpose. You looked down at the feather again. And then you made the choice. We go in, you said. Together. The hollow responded. The mirror shivered. And the handprint on the wall began to glow. Not brightly, but enough. Enough to guide you forward. In the silence that followed, you felt it again, the breath of the archivist, slow and steady. And for the first time, it felt like an invitation. Or a dare. You stood before the glowing handprint etched into the stone like a scar, the gentle pulse of its light matching the slow rhythm of breath you'd felt for nights now, an invisible presence, vast and patient. The archivist was not watching you. He was waiting. The hollow had grown quieter since your decision. The flickering candles no longer hovered. Instead, the light emanated from the runes in the stone floor, casting a low blue haze across your faces. It was a calm, eerie sort of silence, like the hush of snowfall over forgotten graves, or the final breath before the plunge into sleep. Amari was the first to speak. We'll need a stabilizer, he said, voice steady. Something to keep us tethered to here, this reality. If we lose connection, we may not come back. We don't even know what back means, Liz added, stepping forward, her eyes already scanning the page she had shown you the night before. According to Bruma's half-written charm, memory doesn't function like a place. It shifts. Changes. The archivist doesn't keep memories as they were. He keeps them as they were felt. You frowned. So, we're not entering a moment. We're entering emotion. Liz nodded. Callan sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, his broken wand laid gently beside him like a sleeping pet. Brilliant. so we could end up inside a fear or a lie or someone's version of a truth that never actually happened. His voice was light, but his hands were clenched tight in his lap. "We'll do it together," you said. That mattered. Amari produced a glass vial from within his robe, filled with a substance that looked like woven moonlight, liquid and silvery, yet somehow made of threads. "This is distilled moonvine. It binds spellwork to intent. It'll anchor the charm." Liz stepped to the wall and placed her hand next to the massive burnt handprint, the glow of it throwing dancing shadows across her face. "I need silence." None of you spoke. With her wand, she began to etch the charm into the air, complex shapes forming in glowing lines, curling and intersecting, runes folding into one another like petals in reverse bloom. As she worked, the memory within the hollow responded. The room hummed with a deeper pitch, one that trembled in your ribs. "I'll speak the anchor word," Liz said softly, "but once we cross over, the charm will only hold if we're emotionally aligned. If any one of us breaks focus, if we fear, deny, reject, we could fracture the connection." "What happens then?" Callan asked, his voice small. "We become part of the memory," Amari answered. "No longer observers." There was nothing else to say. Liz spoke the word. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in Latin or any recognizable tongue. It was a sound that felt more like a feeling, a breath drawn sharply at the edge of realization, the sound of remembering something you never meant to forget. The runes flared. The hollow vanished. You were no longer in a chamber beneath the library. There was no stone beneath your feet. No mirrors. No candles. Only a vast, dusky field stretching out in every direction, lit by a sky of deep violet, no stars, no sun. Just endless soft twilight. And above you, windless air carried distant voices like fog, half laughter, half weeping. "Where are we?" Callan whispered. "In a memory," you said. "But not ours." Shapes began to form in the haze, flickers of people without faces, moments without time. A boy cradling a book made of leaves. A woman walking backwards into a door that didn't exist. A soundless scream that left ripples in the sky. And then, cutting through the strangeness like a clear note through static, Bruma. She stood beneath a bent willow tree that shouldn't have grown in this place, her robes muddy and torn, her hands grasping a torn page from her journal. Her eyes were fixed on you. Not at you. Through you. "She doesn't see us," Amari said. "Not yet." You stepped forward slowly, each footfall light, uncertain if the ground beneath would hold. When you were close enough to see her lips move, you realized she was speaking, but her voice came in echoes behind your ears, not in front. "It's like trying to write on water," she murmured. "Every time I remember, he changes it." The page in her hand disintegrated into sand. "I thought I could outright him, but he writes over me." You tried to call her name. The moment you spoke, the air cracked. The sky above rippled within dark shapes, long and fluid, like thoughts unformed. The archivist was aware of you now. The wind returned, but it was not made of air. It was made of pages, thousands of them, fluttering past your face in a cyclone of forgotten things. You saw fragments in the storm, a spell you forgot to finish. A promise you meant to keep. A childhood lullaby lost to age. He's pulling us into his library, Liz warned. We have to anchor again. I can't, Callan shouted. The charm's dissolving. Amari grabbed your wrist. We find the source. The memory Bruma fought hardest to keep. That's where she'd hide the key. The world buckled. The field vanished. You fell and landed in a stone corridor. Hogwarts. But not now. Not yours. The light was dimmer. The portraits were blank. The walls whispered names you didn't recognize. And at the end of the corridor, a door pulsed with red light, warm and aching. Bruma stood before it. You moved toward her. This time, she turned. Her eyes were full of pain and determination. You came late, she said, her voice distant. But you came. She placed her hand on the door. He can't pass through here. This memory, it's mine. What is it? You asked. My first choice, she whispered. The first time I remembered myself despite him. She turned to you, her hand trembling. You'll have to take it. Carry it. That's the only way forward. What will happen to you? You asked. Bruma smiled faintly. I'll become what I was always meant to be. Not a memory, but a message. She pressed her palm to your chest. You gasped. The memory flooded you, not as a vision, but as feeling, the first time Bruma realized she was being erased. The despair. The rage. The quiet, unfathomable resolve. It burned inside you like a slow star. Behind you, the corridor trembled. The wind returned. But this time, you were ready. You turned to the others. We have to get out. Now. Liz began to speak the anchoring charm again, her voice cracking but strong. Amari and Callan moved to your sides. The door burst open behind you, and a great shadow rose from it, not a figure, but a presence. The archivist. You didn't look back. The world tore and reformed. You were back in the hollow. Bruma's feather lay in your hand. It had turned gold, and carved into the stone beneath your feet were new words. I remember, because you remembered me. You sat down, and for the first time, you felt the hollow breathe with you. The hollow was still, silent, as if holding its breath, as if waiting for something. The air was thick with the weight of what you had just experienced, a moment that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat all at once. You stood in the center of the chamber, the golden feather clasped tightly in your hand, its warmth seeping into your skin. You couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the hollow, but within you. The magic that had enveloped you in the memory of Bruma's defiance, the echo of the archivist's looming presence, still lingered, a faint hum beneath your skin. For the first time, you understood the gravity of what you had touched. The archivist was no longer just a myth. He was real. A force that wove itself through the very fabric of memory, erasing and reshaping it at will. But you had found a crack in his design. You had found a way in. You turned to your friends. Callan stood closest to you, his eyes wide, the confusion and fear still lingering in his gaze. Liz stood slightly to the side, her posture tense, as if she were constantly assessing her surroundings. Amari was the only one who seemed unmoved, as if the events of the Hollow were just another part of the plan he had been silently following all along. "Is it over?" Callan's voice cracked, betraying the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. "Did we win?" You shook your head slowly. "No. We've only uncovered a small part of it. The Archivist still has the power to rewrite memories, to twist them into something they were never meant to be. And Bruma's message. I think it was only the beginning." Liz was the next to speak, her voice quiet but sharp. "We've disrupted something, yes. But that doesn't mean it's gone. We've only revealed a fraction of what's hidden in this place. And now the Archivist knows we're coming." A shiver ran through the room, an undercurrent of energy that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the golden feather in your hand. It was as if the Hollow itself was aware of the battle you were about to face. "You're right," Amari said softly, his eyes fixed on the feather. "This is far from over. But we have an advantage now. We know what the Archivist fears. And that will be our key." The words felt like a promise, but they hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. The Archivist was more than a figure in shadow. He was a force that had touched the very soul of Hogwarts, twisting the threads of memory and history. And now, you were in a race against time to stop him before he could rewrite everything, before the world you knew could vanish beneath the weight of his erasures. You felt a strange compulsion to leave the Hollow, to return to the world above, but there was no immediate clarity as to where you should go. The walls felt tight, closing in on you, as if the magic within them were becoming more restless, more alive. You had been marked, the memory you'd entered now etched into your being, a part of you forever. "Do you think he knows we're here?" Callan asked, his voice small. "I don't think he's finished with us," Liz replied, her gaze unwavering. "Not by a long shot." Amari's hand moved slowly to his robe, pulling out a small scroll of parchment. "We can't afford to sit here and wait. I've been gathering information. There's a spell, a protection spell, that might keep us hidden from the Archivist's reach for a while. But we'll need to leave the Hollow for now. It's too dangerous here." The Hollow seemed to react, as if it understood his words. The runes on the floor flickered, and for a moment the temperature dropped, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. You could feel the oppressive weight of the Hollow growing, the magic that lived in this space beginning to shift with an unfamiliar intensity. You looked around the room, but nothing appeared out of place, nothing except the subtle shift in the air. A presence. Watching. Waiting. You didn't need to say anything. The others knew. They could feel it too. Amari tucked the scroll into his robes and stepped toward the archway that led out of the Hollow. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's move quickly." You followed him, your footsteps soft against the stone floor. The walls of the Hollow seemed to stretch farther as you moved, the space no longer feeling like a part of Hogwarts, but something else entirely. The further you ventured into it, the more the world above seemed to fade, like a dream fading when you woke. You reached the archway, and as you stepped through, you felt an odd shift, like the world you had left behind was no longer quite the same. You were standing in the dungeons now, but the air was thick with tension. The familiar, comforting smell of stone and earth felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the very foundation of Hogwarts was being pulled in different directions. Amari stopped and turned to face you. "We're not safe here. Not anymore." You could hear it now. A faint whisper, just beneath the hum of the castle itself. A soft, insistent sound that seemed to be calling you, beckoning you to follow it. The others had already noticed it too. Callan's eyes darted around nervously, his hand gripping his broken one tightly. Liz frowned, her brow furrowed in thought, as though trying to piece something together. "The archivist is closer than we think," you murmured. "I can feel it." Amari nodded. "We have to keep moving. We need to find a way to anchor ourselves. We can't be caught off guard again." The whispers grew louder. The corridor stretched on, twisting and turning, but they felt wrong. The stone beneath your feet felt colder, more brittle, as if it were slowly cracking apart. The whispers, those voices just out of reach, grew louder still, until they were no longer just sounds, but thoughts floating around you like smoke. You tried to focus on them, but they slipped away, dissolving into the air like vapor. "There's something wrong," Callan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the way back." Liz stopped, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the surroundings. "We're being led somewhere," she said softly. "Not by the archivist, but by something else." A cold gust of wind blew through the narrow passage, and the air shimmered with a strange, silvery light. You felt it before you saw it, a doorway, half-formed and flickering in and out of existence, like a mirage in the dark. It wasn't real. Not in the way things were real. "Is this it?" Amari asked, his voice tense. You nodded, despite the gnawing uncertainty in your gut. "It has to be." The doorway flickered again, more solid this time. You could see the faint outline of a room on the other side, an odd, vast library stretching endlessly into the shadows. Its shelves were filled with books and scrolls that seemed to pulse with life, the pages turning of their own accord. It was a place where time didn't exist, a place where memory itself could be rewritten. This was the heart of the archivist's domain. You stepped toward the door. The air hummed louder. The whispers turned to shouts, to cries, to screams. And then, as you crossed the threshold, the world shattered. The floor beneath your feet cracked open, and the light from the doorway flickered out, leaving you in darkness. You were no longer standing in the dungeons of Hogwarts. You were standing in a void, suspended between worlds, surrounded by the endless whisper of forgotten things. And the archivist was watching. The void was colder than anything you had ever felt. It wasn't just a physical cold, it was an absence, a hollow space that consumed everything it touched. The darkness around you stretched infinitely in every direction, pressing in like the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. You couldn't see your hands in front of your face, but you could feel them, solid and real, yet utterly disconnected from the world around you. And then, the whispering began. At first, it was faint, almost imperceptible, a soft rustle of pages turning, the murmur of voices and languages you didn't understand. The further you stood in the dark, the more the whispers grew, until they filled the space with a constant, relentless hum. The words, though distant, were clear in their intent. "We are forgotten. You are forgotten. All that was once known will be lost. You were no longer just in the dungeons of Hogwarts. You were inside the archivist's domain, a place where memories were trapped, twisted, and consumed. It was a space of timelessness, a prison of the forgotten. You could feel it in the air. This place didn't just erase memories. It was the keeper of them. The keeper of all things that had been lost, altered, or made to vanish. midst of the darkness, you could hear your friends. They were there, somewhere near you, but it was as if their voices were coming from a great distance. Callan's voice was the most distinct. "Where are we?" he called out, his words tremulous, yet determined. "What's happening? What's—" The hum of the voices around you intensified, drowning him out, until the only thing you could hear was the ever-present murmur of the memories that surrounded you. "We are forgotten. You are forgotten." You clenched your hands into fists. "We're not forgotten," you said firmly, though even as the words left your mouth, they seemed to tremble in the cold air, fading into nothingness. "We're here." A flicker of light appeared in the distance, weak at first, a solitary point of illumination. You felt it pulling you, and despite the gnawing fear that gripped your chest, you stepped toward it. The others followed without hesitation, though you could hear the uncertainty in their footsteps, each one tentative, unsure. As you drew closer, the light expanded, growing brighter and warmer, revealing a vast, impossibly tall library. The shelves stretched so high that their tops disappeared into the darkness above, filled with endless rows of books. But these weren't just any books. These were books of memories, written not by human hands, but by something far older, far more powerful. The archivist's domain. You felt a pull in your chest, as though something was drawing you closer to the center of the library. There, in the heart of it all, was a figure. A tall, shadowy form, its edges blurred and indistinct, as though it was never meant to be seen clearly. The figure was the source of the whispers, its presence at once terrifying and magnetic. The archivist. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood, his form a dark silhouette against the brightening light that surrounded him. His eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed like tiny pinpricks of light in the deep darkness, a reflection of the countless memories he had consumed over eons. "You've come," his voice echoed, and it was as if his words seeped into your very bones, reverberating in your mind. It wasn't just sound, it was the weight of history, the gravity of forgotten things. But what can you hope to accomplish? You cannot rewrite what has been forgotten. Liz stepped forward, her gaze unflinching, her hands steady at her sides. "We are not here to rewrite," she said quietly, but her words cut through the air like a blade. "We are here to remember." The archivist's form seemed to flicker, shifting like smoke in a breeze. For a moment, his presence wavered, as if unsure of how to respond. And then, in an instant, he was there, looming before you, his immense form filling the space. You could feel his presence pressing down on you, suffocating, his very essence trying to erase the air from your lungs. "You think memory can be reclaimed?" he asked, his voice dark and rich with disdain. "What you call memory is nothing but a fleeting shadow, a mirage in time. It cannot be held. It cannot be remembered. It is mine to mold, mine to shape. And when the memory fades, so too do you." He raised one hand, and the air rippled around you like a wave of heat. The memories in the library trembled, as if at his command, their spines rattling like the bones of a forgotten world. You saw flashes of images, moments from your life, tiny, fleeting memories you had long ago forgotten. A soft breeze in the forbidden forest. A conversation you once had in the library with a friend you could barely recall. The taste of warm chocolate on a cold winter's day. All these little things, lost in the sands of time, now floating before you like fragile bubbles, fragile and ephemeral. But then, As the archivist's hand hovered over them, the images began to warp. They twisted and distorted, as if his very touch was unmaking them, bending them to his will. The fleeting moments of joy and peace became shadows, full of fear and doubt, until they were nothing but empty voids. You felt the weight of that power. You felt the suffocating grip of it, as if your own memories were slipping away from you, dissolving into nothingness. "No," you whispered, the word barely audible. "We won't let you take them." The archivist's cold gaze turned to you, his eyes narrowing. "You cannot stop what is inevitable. Memories are nothing more than echoes. They have no true form. They fade. They die." But you felt something stirring within you, a deep resolve. You were standing on the edge of oblivion. You could feel the pull of it, the temptation to surrender. But you knew, deep down, that this was not the end. The archivist could erase memory. He could twist and rewrite it, but he could not obliterate it. Not entirely. Liz's voice broke through the tension. "We don't have to fight him. We just have to remember the truth." Amari nodded, his hand moving to the golden feather you had carried from the hollow. It pulsed faintly in your hand, warm and alive. "This is our key. This is the truth the archivist fears, the truth that cannot be erased." Memory is not just about what is written. It's about what is felt. And that is something you cannot touch. The archivist's form flickered again, and for a moment he seemed uncertain, as if the very foundation of his existence was being challenged. The glow of his eyes dimmed, just slightly, but enough to give you hope. You stepped forward, your heart steady despite the overwhelming presence before you. "We are not here to fight you," you said, your voice clear and strong. "We are here to remind you. To remind you that the things you've taken are still alive. You cannot erase what has been felt, what has been loved. It will always return." And as you spoke, the golden feather in your hand flared to life, its light spreading outward like a wave, touching everything in the library. The books trembled, their pages fluttering, and the whispers began to change. No longer were they filled with fear and erasure. They were filled with words of truth, of love, of joy, of everything the archivist had tried so desperately to consume and rewrite. The archivist recoiled, his form flickering with anger. "You think you can remind me?" he hissed. "You are nothing." But the light continued to grow, the memories returned, and the air around you shimmered with the weight of truth. "We are everything," you said, your voice echoing through the library. "And we will remember." In that moment, the archivist's presence faltered, his shadowed form crumbling like paper to ash. The books around you stopped trembling, the whispers fading into silence. The power of the archivist, the force that had once seemed all-consuming, was gone, dissipating like fog in the morning light. You stood alone in the vast, empty library, the golden feather still glowing brightly in your hand. You could feel the memories, your memories, alive once more, woven into the very fabric of this place, this world. The archivist was no more. And as the light grew stronger, you realized that you had not only remembered, you had returned. Thank you for joining me in tonight's story. I hope it brought you the peace and comfort you needed, a gentle escape into a world of mystery and magic. As you drift off to sleep, remember that no memory is ever truly lost, and every moment, no matter how small, is a part of who we are. Let the calm of this story linger in your mind, soothing and soft, as you allow yourself to rest. Tomorrow is a new day, full of possibilities, but for now, let the quiet stillness of the night wrap around you like a warm blanket. Good night, and may your dreams be peaceful and kind.